Professor Beverly Alimo Metcalfe has an international reputation in the field of leadership studies. She has recently completed a 3-year research study which identified the nature of the link between leadership culture and the effectiveness of multi-professional teams. Beverly kindly took some time out of her very busy schedule to talk to the health professionals about her research.
I've been asked to talk a bit about the research we've done around leadership and put it in the context of the challenges that the NHS is facing. And I guess the first thing we have to look at is how on earth the NHS is going to cope with arguably the greatest challenges it's ever faced in terms of the economic situation we face, which in essence is about how we're going to get more out of less and how we're going to enable people to be more effective as the challenges get greater, but enable them to give more without damaging their motivation and their morale. Otherwise, it'll be short-lived. The human effort will be short-lived. And I think that the other critical thing is that we enable people to give more without damaging their well-being. And what worries me deeply are levels of stress across the public sector and in the NHS in particular. So this inevitably has to do with leadership, because leadership is about getting the best out of people. But also it's about creating the culture which sustains high levels of performance, but high levels of well-being. And that really has been the focus of our research. What is the nature of leadership that increases people's effectiveness, which not only sustains their morale, but actually increases it and reduces their levels of stress? And we spent 3 years investigating the nature of nearby leadership. It was the very first study that's inclusive by gender, by ethnic background, by level, by occupational group of staff in the NHS. And we conducted it also across the wider public sector, local government and the police service, and then the private sector, but we kept finding the same thing. We weren't interested in distant leadership, you know, what it is that characterizes very successful CEOs, chief execs. We wanted to know what was the leadership that was required on a day-to-day basis that had a profound impact on staff in the NHS. So we asked staff. We got staff to compare outstanding bosses they'd had, poor bosses they'd have, and those in between, and their notion of an ideal boss. And through analysing thousands of examples of behaviour, we identified a model of leadership for which we now have substantial research that enacting these behaviours significantly increases staff motivation, reduces their stress, and increases a sense of what psychologists refer to as self-efficacy, that staff really feel their contribution matters, and it's important, and it's valued. In other words, it increases a sense of staff engagement. At the core of this model of leadership, and this is the model of leadership that needs to guide us in terms of how do we embed a way of being in the culture, because leadership is about leaving legacy. It's about not being dependent on my presence. So we've got to embed this form of leadership in day-to-day behaviour right across the NHS. At the core of it is this notion of authenticity. What people said is that the people who have the most profound impact on my motivation and well-being are those people who are open and honest, who you can trust, they're consistent in what they say and what they do, but they're also very tolerant for the views of other people. They value difference. In fact, they celebrate difference. They encourage people to express their ideas, and they are willing themselves to accommodate their view of the world as well. So there's a very strong sense of authenticity, transparency, and these are people you can rely on. The next cluster was around what we refer to as engaging individuals, and the single most important characteristic of what we refer to as engaging leadership, and the one that's been found to have the most powerful impact, whatever the organisation, whatever the level, on people's motivation, morale, and effectiveness, is what we refer to as showing genuine concern for others. And this has as its essence treating people with dignity. It's things like this person, people said this person is interested in what it's like being me in this organisation. They want to know what my needs and aspirations are. They help me develop my strengths. They coach me. They regularly give me feedback. They try to see the world through my eyes. They just know what it's like being me because they bother to find out. That is the single most powerful dimension And that is all about treating people with respect and treating each individual and celebrating their individual difference, treating them as an individual in their own right and valuing their contributions, making them feel important. But there are other dimensions in this cluster which are around empowering staff. Leadership is very much about letting go. It's about loosening up. As Tom Peters once said, you're out of control when you're in control. But you're in control when you are enabling people to do their own thing, to take responsibilities for their own actions. Then people will go beyond your expectations. So it's very much about empowering people. And another aspect of, and a critical aspect of this engaging individuals is visibility. It's referred to in our model of leadership as being accessible. These people are approachable, personable. They find the time to talk to you despite being very busy. And it says in one of the books on leadership, you might have read it, that leadership, we need to be reminded, is a contact sport. It ain't a virtual reality. So they find the time to go out and make contact. Passing people in the corridor, they have a conversation, they make eye contact. Leadership is about making that difference and adding value to those people with whom you communicate every day, adding value to their experience of this moment, this day, in terms of what they're doing in the organization. So you have to go out and be accessible and approachable. And the final aspect of the showing genuine concern for others cluster is to encourage people to constantly question. They encourage people to think laterally, to think divergently, to think out of the box, to question the traditional ways we have of doing things. One thing we desperately need to do in the NHS is we've got to be more innovative, and that means taking more risks. But the people out there, and often the people at the lowest levels, have the best ideas, so they encourage people to actually voice what's going on in their heads. And they celebrate those ideas and support them in enacting what they suggest, what their suggestions are. So that's one cluster around engaging individuals. Then there's another cluster around engaging the team, and this comes on to the link between leadership and culture. The link between leadership and culture is inextricable. One creates the other. You can have very effective leaders, but if you've got a culture which suffocates them, then you're actually going to you're going to create barriers in terms of their own effectiveness for their staff. So this dimension is about strengthening and really paying attention to the need to create a culture of engagement in one's team. The single most important characteristic of an engaging leadership in terms of this cluster is what we refer to as supporting a developmental culture. Leaders are people who help people to turn mistakes into learning opportunities. Mistakes are inevitable. If we're trying new ways of doing things, and we need to do that, otherwise we will always get what we've always got, then what about those inevitable mistakes? We must not create, as we have in many parts of the NHS and across the public sector, we've created cultures of blame. What this dimension suggests is that these people, first of all, thank people for the fact they've bothered to try a new way of doing things. So they thank them for that. And they say, look, okay, it didn't work as you wanted to, so let's turn that into a learning experience. Take me through what you did. At what point didn't it go well? Reflecting on that, what have we learned from that? So they create a culture of learning and development. And they themselves admit readily what their mistakes are, which creates a culture where other people feel okay about admitting their mistakes. Another thing about leaders in terms of creating the culture within their team or the part of their organization, if they're a very senior manager perhaps across their department, is a dimension we refer to as inspiring others. What surprised us is that after that first dimension I referred to, showing genuine concern for others, which has a profound impact on all 12 impact measures that we measure in the 360 instrument that measures engaging leadership, the second most important dimension is referred to as inspiring others. It's items like this person infects you with their enthusiasm, such that you want to work with them. They've kind of got a can-do attitude. One of the items is also they walk around talking and listening to other people. So it isn't this kind of on the top of a pedestal, charismatic, egocentric leadership. It's about when you make contact with this person, they really do make a difference. And what kind of depresses me sometimes in organizations is how you can enter a lift on the ground floor quite optimistic, and by the third floor you can be suicidal if you meet somebody else who's got an ancient awful story. We really have to do something to make things upbeat, to be optimistic. I mean, there's loads of research emerging now around positive psychology, around how it encourages the creation of innovative ideas, but it also increases well-being, psychological well-being. So it is about infecting people with enthusiasm, making that difference again. It's doing small things. For example, one of the most powerful differences that people say that they've introduced in their team meetings is that they now spend the first 10 minutes before they start a team meeting asking each person in the team just to say something positive that's happened to you this week, something you've noticed somebody else doing. You've read something, you've had a new idea, you've learnt something. Let's share that stuff. It helps to generate a much more kind of divergent way of thinking, and it creates that kind of positive atmosphere, which enables us to have greater energy to deal with some of the challenges we face. So that's the inspiring others. There's also a dimension around focusing team effort, which is so that people are very clear. Each person in the team is clear about their roles and responsibilities. But what's important about engaging leadership is it engages colleagues in the team. We have this clear vision, but let's together decide what are the values by which we're going to achieve that vision. Because it happens through us. And how are we going to, what are the kinds of values that we want to enact in terms of how we work together with other colleagues and other teams, and how we work in terms of service delivery. And then the final dimension around this creating a culture of engagement in the team is being prepared to take tough decisions and also encouraging some judicious risk-taking, creating a kind of an entrepreneurial spirit within their team. So we're always thinking of better and new ways of doing stuff. So that's the cluster around teams. And then finally, we've got this fourth cluster, which is around, we call it moving forward together. If there's one thing this economic crisis has taught us, it's how interconnected we are in the world. What's happening in one part of the world has a profound impact across the other side of the world. But so we are in the public sector. With the challenges we face in our communities, we need to be making much stronger links between the various agencies. Not only public sector, but also voluntary and third sector and private sector organisations. But I don't think we've actually created, and the first dimension is called building shared vision. I don't think we've necessarily created shared visions within our teams or within our own organisations. We need to get people out of their silos and sharing their visions, because each person, everybody who comes to work every day has got a vision. You might be surprised to hear that. But people come to work, after all, for something to do or to do something. And most people come to work to do something. This building shared vision is about either getting people from different teams together or different agencies together or colleagues in our same team or department and say, you know, what is your vision, Sue? What's your vision, Joe? What's your vision, Fred? Let's share our vision about how we should do this, and then together sculpt a shared vision. So it's very much about give and take, but it's also about really buying into and getting people's commitment to that shared vision. If we can do that, what we are creating is a culture in which people are expressing themselves and what they're doing. And that's why it becomes fulfilling, because each of us wants to move towards that vision, that purpose in life, where we come to work today. So a critical aspect of that is about building shared vision. Then another aspect of this dimension is around networking, and engaging leadership really emphasizes the fact that leadership at every level must be about brokering ideas. It's not networking for ambition. Engaging leadership is about creating environments, cultures within teams, within organizations, where we share celebrations, where we share challenges, where people bring in ideas from different departments or different parts of the organization. They might, for example, set up what's referred to as a hot group working on a particular challenge, so that they get very different perspectives. Or you might, within your own team, say to your colleagues at the end of a team meeting, okay, let's spend the last 15 minutes just asking, does anybody in this team have a specific challenge, a problem that they've come across that they can't quite see the way forward, or it's keeping them awake at night? Okay, tell us what that issue is, tell us what that challenge is, and each of us will think of one thing, one way we can support you. Or we'll offer you some advice, or we'll suggest something from our own experience that's worked, or put you in contact with somebody else. How can we create cultures where we are constantly sharing and learning from each other? So that's what networking is about, sharing ideas. And then finally, the last two dimensions around resolving complex problems, seeing core issues in complex problems, the big picture and the detail, and Finally, facilitating change sensitively, being sensitive to the fact that one colleague in my team might be anxious about a change, another person might be celebrating it, because it creates opportunities for them. Or if I'm a senior manager, creating a culture where I'm aware that I can push a bit faster with that team, because they'll be really excited and ready for that challenge. But another team, another group might need a different kind of support. So it's being about sensitive to those factors. And finally, it's about maintaining the need for some stability as well as the need for change. So in summary, this form of leadership is about embedding a culture where the essence is about authenticity, it's about being transparent and consistent, acting with integrity, and it's about saying everybody in our organization must feel important about what they do. And it's about treating them with dignity and as an individual with perhaps very different perspectives from mine, but they need to know that their contribution is invaluable. And that's the kind of culture we need to create. Now, we know from our research that enacting these behaviors significantly predicts motivation, morale, reduced stress of staff in the NHS, but we now have done a second three-year study, which is one of the first studies ever conducted in the world to find that, which has found that if you embed this culture in teams in your organisation, and we did the research around multi-professional mental health teams in the NHS, if you embed this culture in your teams, it predicts the effectiveness of those teams 1 year later, but it also not only predicts the most effective and productive teams, but it also predicts those teams with the highest morale and the lowest levels of stress. The most effective teams that we found in our research were also those with the highest levels of morale and the lowest levels of emotional exhaustion. In other words, it works. And that's really the message for us is we've got to, each of us, because leadership is no longer about just looking at people in very senior roles. Leadership is about what we do together. It's a social process that connects people. It's not who I am or who you are. It's what we do together. And really this model resembles a model of servant leadership. Leadership is about serving others and enabling them to be better leaders and better people themselves. That's the kind of culture, appreciative culture we need to create.